Today we begin a new series of study in the book of 1 Peter. You can find your place there at chapter 1, verse 1. We'll only be looking at a couple of verses today that are part of an introduction. But in this particular introduction, Peter does way more than just introduce the author and the recipients. He gives us some very rich and detailed theological information along the way that has a great deal to do with who we are as Christians. And that will be true throughout the book. Probably some things that you don't know about Peter that may be helpful, especially in relation to this and to this study. These two letters, and we have in the past studied 2 Peter, but not 1st, and so that's why I'm returning to that. Peter is well known, so you know him as the kind of lead apostle and disciple. And you know about his calling, you know about the various things that are associated, and we'll mention a few of those along the way. But for the sake of what we're looking at here, the context of 1 Peter, and it is a letter that is written to people that are believers that have been established in Asia Minor and in various regions. It doesn't really name cities, also, although sometimes they are the same. It names regions, and in these regions, these churches are experiencing persecution. This is not a widespread government-sponsored persecution. This is not some sort of movement against Christians as they are developing. This would be localized. This would be something where they are experiencing persecution and opposition from their families, from their community members. They're breaking with traditions that were steeped for perhaps centuries even in false teaching, lies, immorality, and now their lifestyles are changing. They're proclaiming the gospel. They're living the gospel, and people don't always approve of that and don't like it. And so there's been some opposition as a result. Peter writes to them in order to encourage them. The timing for the letter is impossible to say for sure. We don't really know. But the best guess that we have based on some of the contextual things that are said in the letter is that it was somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s, like 60 or 61 AD that 1 Peter was written. We know that Peter spent a great deal of time in and around Rome, which is probably where he is now when he's writing this letter. We also know that when Nero comes to power, there will be a fairly short-lived but extremely intense persecution of Christians that are in the area of Rome in particular. And thousands will be murdered because of this. This is when the Apostle Paul is executed, most likely in 65 AD. Peter also was arrested and executed, most likely that year or the year after, during that brief period where such heavy took place. So he knows what it's like. He's familiar with persecution. He knows what opposition is going to feel like. So when Peter writes, he's doing so to encourage, to build up, to strengthen, but to also give them some assurance. So that gives us a little bit of the historical context. It also gives us a little bit of information with regard to the spread of the gospel in the Roman Empire by this time. And it is indeed widespread through most of the known world as we consider that today. So, the title of the series is A Holy People in a Hostile World. And I think this really fits because Peter stresses the importance of holiness, and clearly we see the reality of the hostility that is being directed at them. He writes this first epistle to Christians living in Roman provinces in Asia Minor. Asia is sometimes how it's simply referred to in the Bible, but it's not a reference to the continent of Asia or what we think of as the Orient, but rather it is an area of the country that would be known today as modern Turkey. These believers have formed churches in the cities and villages of the provinces that are mentioned, And they are now facing a localized opposition and persecution from pagan neighbors and friends and families. The message of 1 Peter is focused on the importance of three things: Christian identity, the work of sharing the gospel regardless of the cost, and the hope of heaven as the believer's true citizenship that inspires faith, perseverance, endurance, and godliness. And so we see this message repeated and at times very specifically in focus. It brings us face to face with the ever-present reality of sharing and living the gospel in a culture that is dominated by false teaching, immorality, godless government, and violence. While the circumstances in the first century certainly are quite different from that compared to modern America, the principles are eerily similar. Now we'll make a statement. Let it settle in your mind before you pass judgment. The purpose of the church has never been culture change. Jesus didn't change the government. He didn't alter the culture, but he did change people. And he did it through the good news of the gospel and the kingdom of God. He taught us to set our minds on things above, to live as citizens of heaven, looking forward to the ultimate day of redemption when all will be made new. He told us that the world would hate us because it hated him. And he reminded us the way of life is narrow, but the majority will choose destruction. Our goal has never been the approval of people. Our goal must always be peace with God. Now, that being said, wherever the gospel takes root, culture changes and is inevitably challenged. But that isn't the point. If that were the point, then our focus and our attention would be on developing methods, strategies, and various programs in order to produce culture change. That isn't our point. Our point is to share Christ, trusting him to change people, knowing that people are the salt and light in a world of darkness and corruption. Through faith, all that is necessary for perseverance has been given by God's grace. However, it doesn't make life easy. It does fill it with purpose that endures beyond this life. So anchored in the grace of God, Christians can live faithfully and fully as strangers in a strange land. That's the title of the message today in the series, A Holy People in a Hostile World. They go together pretty well, but it will branch out somewhat. Strangers in a strange land. In verse 1, it says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Verse 1 gives us a beginning. It is an introduction, essentially, and so it is intended to do exactly that. Peter identifies himself as an apostle of Jesus Christ. The name Peter is familiar. Do you remember, however, that it's a nickname? Tonight is trivia night. What is Peter's real name? It's for 100 points. Simon. Simon is his real name. It's his given name. And when he calls Simon to follow him and he becomes introduced almost immediately, Jesus said, you will be Cephas. Cephas, I thought you said Peter. Cephas is Peter. And so they mean the same thing. Peter is his Greek name. It means rock. At times it described the hardness of his head. At other times it described the determination of his conviction. Jesus called him the rock. It is essentially a nickname. We were talking about names beforehand. Scott's name is his middle name. Scott is my middle name. And we have different reasons. Most of it has to do with confusion, having the first name that is associated with a dad or another relative. My dad is Gerald. He looks like Gerald. He was made to be a Gerald. I'm not a Gerald. Gerald doesn't fit me, but I do use it extensively because it is my first name, so it's my legal name. And I'm certainly not ashamed of it. I just don't look like a Gerald. And so when people call and say, hey, Gerald, just wanted to tell you about this great new opportunity, I know immediately you don't know me. Because if you knew me, you would call me Scott. What's in a name? There's a lot. There's a lot in the name, especially when that name is given to you by someone close. Jesus gave Simon the name Peter. It is a strong statement that reminds us. Peter identifies himself not only by his name, but also as an apostle of Jesus Christ. When he was given the name Simon, when it was given to Simon by Jesus early in his ministry, when he was called as a disciple, but later Jesus would expand the meaning of his nickname when Peter was the first to declare that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. Jesus went on to say that upon the foundation of Peter's Spirit-inspired confession of faith, he would build his church. Peter was far from perfect, yet he became the leader of the apostles through the redeeming work of Christ, and he gave the confession of faith that is the foundation of the church. I think a lot of times we lose sight of that, and people have misinterpreted that passage over and over, claiming that Peter was the first in a long lineage of others who would come after him, and that they were the foundation that Jesus was talking about. But that isn't true at all, and that's just bad theology, and it's even worse interpretation. What we see is that the confession of his faith, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, is the foundation, so that Jesus would say, upon this confession of faith, upon this conviction of belief, I will build my church and the gates of hell will not prevail against her. The church must never lose sight of the reality that we exist because Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. This is our hope. This is our promise. This is our profession. This is our confession. This is the foundation upon which the church itself rests and exists, and without it, we are lost. Peter, what a wonderful name to reflect, especially in light of such information. By using his designation as an apostle of Jesus Christ, he exercised the authority that Christ had given him for that very role. An apostle is one who is sent to deliver the words of the one who sent him. Apostolic authority was the means by which the word of God was given to the world in what we now call the New Testament. So I think a lot of times we understand the Bible and we understand some of its development. And in the Old Testament, it's a little bit easier because the prophets spoke the word of the Lord, thus saith the Lord, and then it was recorded, and we have it written down for us in Jeremiah and Isaiah and Daniel and Ezekiel and so forth. And so that's pretty easy to understand. But when we get to the New Testament, things are changing and things are different, and yet they are also still the same. Now we have apostles and prophets. And so God is conveying his word. Christ is giving his word through the apostles and through the prophets. Some of the words of the apostles are the words that they actually heard Jesus speak while they were with him, and the Spirit brings that back to mind for them as they record those words in the Gospels. You may not know that Peter is the foundational gospel authority. And so when you read the Gospel of Mark, what you're reading is the first gospel that was written, and you're reading the words of Peter. Mark simply recorded the words of Peter, and Peter was the source. That became the source then for Matthew and Luke as well. John, on the other hand, came much, much later and is not written in the chronological order that the other three are, and so is not included as a synoptic gospel, but an eyewitness account of very particular events that the Lord led him to share. Then when we get to the book of Acts, Luke remains the author and the one who records it, but many times he is speaking the words of other apostles, either Peter or John or the apostle Paul. All of them are the means by which God gave us his word. We see the epistles and we read the letters that are written by the apostles, and it reminds us and teaches us what God wants us to know. So that when Peter describes himself by name, but also as an apostle of Jesus Christ, he's saying, Jesus sent me, and these are the words he gave me to give to you. This is where biblical integrity and authority comes from, and it is why we believe it to be the inerrant word of God, given to us specifically, never to be dismissed nor added to, but to be accepted by faith as the instruction in all matters of life and faith. The recipients, he says, to those who are elect exiles of the dispersion. What does he mean, elect exiles of the dispersion? First of all, they were scattered throughout the 5 regions of Asia Minor that are listed for you there. Referring to them as elect identifies believers as the people of God. Elect is a term previously reserved for Israel, but now that term is applied to the church. Clearly, Christian faith is again affirmed as the work of God through his election of people for salvation. No one can come to salvation unless the Spirit draws him. If people could save and redeem themselves, we wouldn't need Jesus at all. Now, a lot of people are uncomfortable with the subject of election or the word elect, believing that it somehow infringes upon their free will. There are so many things that are currently at this very moment infringing upon your free will that you have no way to even calculate that. And so the idea of free will, for the most part, is a complete myth. What is true? Well, what is true is individual responsibility. Now that is true. And we are all responsible, or all have sinned and come short of the glory of God, and our responsibility is for the sins that we have committed. What God has done is chosen by his grace to call us out of that sin. And election shows the intentional purpose of God as well as the sovereign power of God to accomplish that redemption for others. It is not about somehow infringing on your own sense of personal space before God. It is about reaching out to you who are lost and destitute apart from him and showing you with clarity by his grace, intentionality, and doing everything for you so that even while we are still sinners, Christ died for us. That's what election is about. It's not about you at all. It's about God and what he is doing in you and through you. I'm very comfortable with it, and I think that we all should be, because it's everywhere in the Bible. And if you don't want to understand it, or you don't want to confront it or deal with it, if it's something that makes you awkward or you feel off-put by it, you really need to work on it and get over that. I can help you with that. But the reality is that being chosen by God, being elected for salvation, means that God took the initiative, reached out to you personally, called you to himself, and it should be a cause for celebration, not for confusion. And so he says to the elect exiles, even with the glasses, it's hard to see some of that stuff. The word exile refers to is sometimes translated as stranger. So depending on what translation you're reading today, you will either see exile or you'll see stranger. Sometimes the word alien is used. I don't like that word. It just feels otherworldly. And we were watching the splashdown of the spaceship Artemis 3, and boy, did that bring back some memories. And my grandchildren, I had one grandchild sitting there, and he said, "Yeah, we've heard stories in history." It's like, yeah, I rode to school on a dinosaur, so you know. But then I realized that my children don't remember, and never saw a space shuttle, never saw an Apollo capsule. I mean. And then it was like, wow, this is really a big deal and a new thing for them. So we sat and watched the whole thing. And so as you know, if you watched it, there was a fairly long period of time from the time it splashed down into the Pacific Ocean to the time where the boats arrived and the helicopters and they finally get the astronauts out of the spacecraft. There was some technological issues with their communication that they needed to establish and so forth. But when we were sitting there, my grandson says, "What do you think they're waiting on?" I said, "Well, you see when they go around that spaceship, that capsule every time, they've got these scanners on the boats, and they're looking for space aliens that have gotten in." And I said, there's a lot of movies made about this stuff. and he looked at me and he said, "That's not true." I said, "No, it's not true. I don't know why they're taking so much time." I don't like the word alien. I like stranger. I like sojourner. I like exile. Those are all good words. Exile, though, carries with it another form of emphasis that sometimes is overlooked, but I think applies here. And the ESV picks that up very well. And the idea is that we are exiled in that we, by our sinfulness, have been exiled from the true home that was intended. And so when he calls us the elect exiles, he's describing people who have been changed by God's grace, but who still live in a world that is broken. And that we do so for however long this world exists or however long we exist on it. And the reality is that all of us have been disaffected by sin. And what Christ is doing is bringing us back into the very heart of his affection. And this describes it in just 2 words. And it does it beautifully: elect exiles. And so as he reminds us of these things, it is a powerful teaching point. The dispersion does not refer to a particular historical event, but rather to the fact that Christians were scattered throughout the regions that are named in varying degrees of concentration. And even though a large geographic area is represented, the naming of the regions made it possible to show that Peter was aware of people in each of them, possibly even knew personally those people to which he was writing. And even though he would not be the one to bring the letter to them, that would probably be done by Silas, or as he is also known, Silvanus. And he would be the one to make the circuit of these churches that are in these different regions and either copy the letter so that they would have it after the fact, or read it to them and teach its truth to them. And so the dispersion is talking about an event, it's talking about just the natural progression of human movement and migration. And as that takes place, these Christians find themselves in different parts of the world. Now they are establishing churches and they're reaching out and they are sharing the gospel, and they are also facing hardship as a result of it. And so sometimes we do see the word dispersion used in a historical event like the diaspora of the Jews from Jerusalem and Judea in 70 AD after Roman conquest. They didn't return until 1948. And so we know that those types of events have occurred. There have been Christian dispersions that took place at various times as well, where people moved and migrated as refugees almost from places that had been familiar. This isn't that. This is just the normal progression and the result of being scattered about where we share the gospel. And so when we look at this text, what we find is that the elect exiles of the dispersion then are what he's referring to. They are scattered throughout the known world. They are there with intent and purpose, and they are sharing the gospel, and Peter wants to encourage them. He doesn't want them to flee. He doesn't want them to withdraw. He doesn't want them to hide, and he certainly doesn't want them to deny their faith. He wants them to stand firm, and to that end, he will teach us just how to do that. That's the beginning. What about the believing? In verse 2, the first part of it, it says, according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, in the sanctification of the Spirit, for obedience to Jesus Christ, and for sprinkling with his blood. And so when you look at the first verse where it says, to those who are elect exiles, that is connected to verse 2, elect exiles according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. Elect exiles in sanctification of the Spirit, and elect exiles for obedience to Jesus Christ and the sprinkling of his blood. This is just the grammatical technique that is used to connect us through our identity as believers now to the specifics of what that belief reflects. The three phrases in verse 2 modify this statement of elect exiles in verse 1. Essentially, we are elect according to the foreknowledge of God the Father. To know, foreknowledge, means that he knows you because he's always known you, because he made you. What do you know? We have a lot of extraneous information. Isn't it interesting how the internet has changed things, and our access to it with the phone has changed things, and now we don't even have to look it up and go to the trouble of typing it. We can just tell the voice assistant to do it, and then the robots go to work gathering the information and spitting it back out to us. It's a beautiful thing, really. It's also a terrifying thing, and I don't know when the uprising comes. I've seen Terminator. I know that it's inevitable, but no one's figured out time travel, and that seems to be an important element to that, so I'm not too worried about it. What I do find interesting is that the access to this overwhelming amount of information gives us access to information that we don't really, and let's be honest, don't really need to know. But we have this thought. I don't know what that particular species of monkey on that remote island likes to eat. We'll ask Siri. And so, we look up this stuff. Well, is that going to enhance your intellect and ability to process cognitive problems and information over a vast array of circumstances? Probably not. But if anybody wants to know about the diet of some sort of obscure monkey on a distant island that you'll never visit, then you're ready. Trivia, this is you. You're all set up for trivia right away. And so this is an interesting thing. We have a lot of information. We know a lot of things. What do you really know? What you really know is what you've experienced. Got a phone call this week, and person said, hey, I'm signed up for this cataract surgery and heard you mention that you just had that done. I got some questions. I said, okay. What was it like? I said, I don't know. And they said, what do you mean you don't know? I said, well, they said I was awake, but I don't remember it. And he said, you don't remember any of it? I said, no, the first one I did. I remembered a lot of stuff. But I said, there's no pain, there's no discomfort, there's none of that. It was pretty smooth. And I told him that I remembered various elements of the procedure in the second one. I said, man, I didn't even get through the door of the operating room before I forgot everything. And I said, I don't know what they gave me the second time, but there was one thing for sure. They didn't want me to remember it. And I said, afterwards, it's fine. You don't have any pain. There's no discomfort. I said, we went to breakfast and, had pancakes because that's what you do if you're a good boy when you see the doctor. And so that's what we did. I said, it's just inconvenient because, you go through some changes and you got timing, you got to wait here and there and whatever. It's just inconvenient. If you're a patient person like myself, then it's not a big deal. But I'm sure that a lot of people would have struggles with that. Well, why did he call me? Because he knows that I know. And how do I know? I've experienced it. That's what this is. The foreknowledge of God means that he has known you from before the existence of time itself, from before you were born or even imagined. He has known you, and your name has been written in the book of life even before the foundations of the earth were laid. The foreknowledge of God is the indication of his supreme sovereignty in everything, including your redemption, so that he is reminding us that we can be strengthened through the knowledge of the one who knows us better and more than we could possibly ever imagine. What we see in the Old Covenant then is that to know was associated with the people of God. It carries over into the New Covenant with the personal experience in which the very presence of God now resides in the heart of every redeemed person. This foreknowledge highlights his sovereignty, but it also shows that over all things there is intent and purpose that brings these things to pass for his glory. God not only has foreknowledge of your salvation, he makes it happen and calls us to himself. This is a beautiful statement of our relationship with the Father. And he's telling this beleaguered group of folks in Asia, you were intentionally chosen and called for God's glory, and that has not ceased nor changed just because times are hard. God is the same. His glory remains. Circumstances do not dictate. But he also refers to the believers that are elected through the sanctifying work of the Spirit. Not only does God the Father foreknow whom they will be, but the Spirit is the source of their sanctification. The term sanctification is often used to refer to progressive growth of holiness in the lives of Christians. In this context, however, the focus is on conversion. Think of the literal definition of sanctification. It means to set apart for a purpose. He's talking about the moment in which we are set apart. The moment that you are called to Christ and that you accept his offer of grace is the moment that the Spirit takes up residence in your life and you are set apart for his purpose and glory. Sanctification. And so we see the work of the Father. Now we see the work of the Spirit in this sanctifying work that goes beyond just the immediate moment, but it also extends to all of life. So as the gospel is proclaimed, the Spirit sanctifies people by bringing them to faith and by bringing them into the realm of the holy itself. Third, the elect are obedient to Jesus Christ, meaning to obey the command of Jesus to be born again. So what we're talking about is God's intent from before time began, the Spirit's work by which we are set apart, and the blood of Christ that is applied to us as we obey in receiving him for salvation, through which then that blood is the cleansing work that purifies, the forgiving work that takes away sin, and the setting apart work that atones, so that we are now right with God through the sacrifice of Jesus. The foreknowing of God, the sanctifying work of the Spirit leads the believer to obey the call of Christ for salvation. In response to the acceptance of his gift of grace, the blood of the new covenant is applied, purifying from sin, atoning for salvation, and the obedience of faith is for a conversion. But it leads to continuity of life as we move forward. We call it transformation. Finally is blessing. Third thing in the last part of verse 2, may grace and peace be multiplied to you. The introduction concludes with a prayer of blessing for grace and peace. Grace is a common Christian blessing that acknowledges no greater gift for a person than to receive God's grace, his unmerited favor that leads to salvation and hope. No wonder that believers can pray for and live in the grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And this is the calling to which he has extended in all of us. Someone asked me recently, what do you think is the most important doctrine of the church? I said that would be a difficult question to answer, to elevate one above the other. I said, but for me personally, what I think about most is grace. And it's because that's what I need most. I need grace because of my imperfection, my hard-headedness, and my distraction. I need grace for what I've done in the past, what I'm doing in the moment, and what I will do in the future. I don't need to be held to the standard that I can never achieve. I need to be drawn to Christ and to find in him the sufficiency for faith and life and hope. Grace. And what is the result? The result is peace. He asks a blessing of grace and peace. Do you feel at peace? I do probably 3-4 minutes a day, somewhere in there. I'd like to say I do when I'm sleeping. I don't always, because I sometimes sleep fitfully. I don't really dream much, but when I wake up, I feel somehow tired. Kathy may be punching me in my sleep. I don't know. That's a distinct possibility and likely well-deserved. But nonetheless, peace isn't something that's a normal thing for us. It's hard for us. And I think the reason is because we're looking for it in the wrong place. We're looking for tranquility. We're looking for some sort of, weirdness that's going to make everything through meditation or some other practice go away. Even if that works, it will be brief. It will not be lasting, because the world crashes back in every time you open your eyes or step outside your door, and sometimes you don't even have to do that. And if that's all the peace you're ever going to get, that's not much. I don't think that's what he's asking for. He's asking for peace that brings a settled confidence in the heart and mind of the believer, to know that you are born again, that you belong to Jesus, and that you will one day be with him for all eternity. That's where peace comes from. Peace has as much to do with our identity as it does with our certainty, and it is not from us, it is from him. Jesus said to his disciples after he told them that he was going to die on the cross and would be separated from them briefly, he said, "Let not your hearts be troubled, neither be afraid. You believe in God, believe also in me." At the end of that chapter, he said it again. "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you. Not as the world gives, give I unto you. Let not your hearts be troubled, neither be afraid." Peace comes from faith, genuine faith in a genuine Savior. Jesus said, "I offer you peace. The world gives you trouble and chaos. I offer you peace." Does that make the trouble and chaos go away? It does not. But it sure makes you better equipped to deal with it. This is who he's calling us to be. He's calling us to be holy people in a hostile world. He's calling us to be strangers in a strange land, and to realize this is not our home, but it is our assignment. This is not the end, but it is where we get started. This is not all there is, but it's what is at the moment. And so what we do with what he has given, we do to his honor and glory. Peter wrote to people who had the exact same circumstances that you and I do. And he is calling us to be faithful and to follow Jesus, knowing that we belong to him, knowing that he is sovereign over all things, and knowing that one day we will be with him. Until then, we will continue to faithfully serve as strangers in a strange land.